My name is Peter Coy. I'm the president of the New York Financial Writers Association. Welcome to a very special event on women pioneers in financial and business journalism and their heirs. So we have both veterans and young people, and it's just in a fantastic lineup of really strong financial and business journalists, and really excited about hearing what they have to say. So this event is in honor of one of our esteemed members who passed away this year, Claudia Deutsch, who was a longtime reporter for the New York Times. Earlier this year, we had an event where we remembered her, told fond stories. That's not what this is about. This is a professional development event. It's not about Claudia, but it's the kind of thing that she would have loved, because she was a big believer in supporting other women in the profession. So I'm not going to give the full bios of everybody because you have that if you've logged on. I'll just tell you that we have Carol Loomis, the amazing Carol Loomis, who joined Fortune in 1954, the longest tenure of any employee in the magazine's history, as well as Alyson Shontell, the first woman and youngest editor-in-chief to helm Fortune. So we've got amazing time span there. Winnie O'Kelley, an industry veteran, now Dean of Academic Affairs at Columbia Journalism School, and Susanne Craig, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter at the New York Times. And our moderator is Diana Henriques, who is a loyal member of the New York Financial Writers Association, as well as an award-winning financial journalist and author who worked alongside Claudia at the New York Times. And so I'm turning the program over now to Diana.
Well, I'm happy to take it on and delighted to have such distinguished panelists with me. I have very fond memories of Claudia. Of course, she was my cubicle neighbor for many years at the New York Times. So we sort of knew each other's stories. I could hear her doing interviews. She could hear me doing interviews. And she is greatly missed. She was a great spark plug. She was the kind of woman that I think I would have wished I had met when I first got into this business as a very young reporter. So the first question I wanted to put to our panelists is, who pulled you into business journalism, and what helped you once you got there? Who were the mentors, the people who really made a difference in your being attracted to business journalism in the first place? Believe me, I'm not quite as long tenured as Carol, but even 50 years ago, it was a very different place. So I'm going to start with you, Susanne, and just ask what drew you into the world of financial journalism, and who reached out and helped.
I think when I think about that, who pulled me in, I think I pulled myself in because I wanted a job in Toronto, and the only place that would hire me was the Financial Post of Canada. But I remember it. I think a lot about mentorship because I showed up that day. I really wanted to work in Toronto, and I showed up at a financial newspaper. I knew nothing about finance. I came from working the overnight shift at the Windsor Star as a police reporter. So I show up and I have no clue, and I have a 1-month contract, and I'm going to succeed or I'm done. And I remember I got handed I was covering the Reichmans too. It was like baptism by fire here, and I was asked to cover the earnings of Olympia in York, and I was on deadline, and I'm looking at it, and I don't even know what net income is. And I'm going to start crying. And the person sitting next to me became a friend of mine, Janet McFarlane. She looked over at me really calmly and said, well, let me help you with that. And didn't look at me and go what a fool you are. What are you doing here? And sort of took me through it. And so I think when I think about sort of my career, I think of two things. I think of sort of random acts of kindness like that I now try to be aware of when, I've come into, to meet people at the times when they've come in, young reporters. They didn't get in the door because they weren't amazing, but they may not know a specific subject, and to remember that, because great reporters can learn anything. And I think that's something I always try and remember. And then I think at the Wall Street Journal, I had a great mentor in my boss, Michael Sikanolfi, who is just a lion of the industry and just such a great guy. And he had just become an editor when I was working for him. And he was wonderful, like at every turn. And he saw that if I succeeded, he succeeded. And he would spend so much time with me on stories. And he would always sort of bring parables when he would come to try and tell me something. Like I would file a story and he would say, well, it needs this, 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 and this. And I was like, well, great. Do you want to do that then? And he'd go, no, you're going to do that. And he always used to say, it was sort of the parable was, you can buy a man a fish and you'll feed him for a day, or you can teach him to fish and feed him for life. And he says, I'm trying to teach you journalism. So for life, you're set. And he would always do stuff like that, but he would work through things and push back all the time. And he was great. So those are kind of the two things that I think of when
great. And it turns out being a police reporter is actually pretty good training for covering business, as in the years that you wound up.
Been very handy for me. Yes,
absolutely. Winnie, what about you? What drew you into business journalism, and who helped do that and helped you when you got on board?
Yeah, thanks. I have to say I'm a little bit like Susanne. I pulled myself into it more or less. It was a great opportunity when I was getting started in this business. If you weren't afraid of math, there weren't that many of us out there, actually, I think was part of it. So I started on a trade circuit route. I was at Advertising Age and I was at American Banker, and the New York Times came calling, and I wound up there. And I was an editor from almost all my career. So when I think about people who gave me a leg up, I don't know how much this happens anymore, but I think about sitting next to my editor with a story on the screen and going through it line by line and doing lots of edits. And early in my career, like late 20s in particular, maybe early 30s, that was huge. To sit down and go through a very long story and really work through all of it and all of the problems of it and everything that needed doing. That was how I learned. And so I was lucky to have quite a few different editors over those years. They would go to Fred Blakely. I can think of Bob Casey at American Banker. Fred went on to the Journal and the Times. At the Times, Glenn Cramon was one who liked to do that. I think the thing he taught me early on that's probably more important than those skills of editing that story line by line was reporters want feedback. So if they file a story, you should read it and give them something the next day. And I think how rare that still is in this business. People file stories and they still say, well, I still haven't heard from my editor. Like, I don't know, does he like it? Does he hate it? Does it need work? What's going on? And I think that was probably the most important thing I learned early on. And for me,
we were all very grateful for that, Winnie.
I think of that for my students now too. But that's really what I learned. It's like, I like working with reporters a lot. It's great fun. It's this incredible gift. You get to work on a front page story every day or dozens of them or big projects. But it's that relationship. And I think I learned that early on that was going to be the most fulfilling part of the job. And that's what got me going.
Terrific. Now, Allison, you came up not only in the world of a woman in the world of business journalism, but a woman in the world of technology, in the world of the famous tech bros that we hear about. So what or who drew you in to the world that you first entered as a journalist and helped you when you got there?
Sure. I always loved media. I have to admit that I didn't foresee going into business. I wish I could say that I had. I hadn't. I did always like it. And I was an advertising major, actually, rather than a journalism major. I had taken magazine classes when I went to Syracuse, and I was always writing on the side. I think I was a little bit afraid to make it a career because that $40,000 salary starting on the advertising side seemed a little bit more sustainable in New York than maybe the $30,000 writing salary when I was joining. And I also figured that if I learned the business of media, I'd be able to take that far. And so I wound up at a startup following a woman that I'd worked for at Condé Nast as an intern. She became the president of a little startup called Silicon Alley Insider. It was 5 people at the time. It was wanting to be the tech crunch covering New York City tech. And I had an opportunity to learn from one of the smartest people I had ever met, who is this woman, Julie Hansen, who said, come work for me. It's a startup. You'll get your hands dirty in everything. You say you might want to be a writer. You say you might want to learn the business side. Just come here and do some of all of it. And so that's where I really fell in love with business. I fell in love with it because I was working on things like our startup pitch decks. BI was a startup at the time, or Business Insider as it is now called, startup. And so I was helping her and our CEO, Henry, put together pitch decks to raise money. I was looking at them come up with a plan for how they wanted to grow the business over time. And I really fell in love with entrepreneurship. And I found myself being drawn to wanting to cover them. And this was in 2007, 2008, when there was more talent starting to leave Wall Street and consider entrepreneurial jobs. Facebook was really exploding. There was kind of an explosion of talent looking into the startup world. And being at a startup myself, I was able to kind of moonlight bright while doing a sales job during the day. So Julie definitely got me into the door of a business publication. I learned to start some of the business of media. And I also found myself on the ground floor of digital media, which we had a theory was going to be very different as a platform than TV or print or radio or any medium that had come before it. You couldn't just take magazine articles and slap them online and expect them to be the same sort of success. Digital was 24/7. It was endless space. There was no parameters. A paragraph could be a story. A picture could be a story. There's so much creativity there. And so being on the ground floor of that moment in time and finding a love of entrepreneurship and business as a beat is what really helped me jump into writing and then go through that path. And that's how I wound up in business journalism.
That's terrific that you had a woman mentor and that you not only covered business, but first did business, which I think is unlike the rest of us. But I want to get to you, Carol, with the same idea. We've been having a few technical problems. Can you hear me? And can you just see if we can hear you? No, we can't. I'm sorry. We can't hear you right now. So we're trying to sort this out. Perhaps it's a volume question.
Diana, I'm going to see if I can find her a phone call to call in with. Give me a minute or two.
Okay, great. There was one in the email. Then I'm going to answer my own question in terms of what drew me into the world of business, and it was really. It's embarrassing to say I fell in love with municipal bond documents. I was covering an investigative story in New Jersey that involved a revenue bond agency that was financed through municipal bonds, and I'd never heard of them. I had no idea what they were, what they looked like, where they traded, how they worked, and had to do a crash course in that. And when I saw that someone actually hands you this gigantic piece of paper that hundreds of pages of information that you could read through and learn all sorts of incredible things, I was hooked and just never looked back. Loved markets from the first time I saw markets. It doesn't really matter what's trading in that market. A market is a market. So let's see. How are we doing? Carol, can we hear you now?
Diana, I just sent you an email with the phone number. Try dialing in with that on your phone.
Okay. All right. Allison, you at Fortune, as I said, there's a stack of old Fortunes over there on the bookcase behind me. A 92-year-old publication, right? And you're coming out of the tech world to address the world at Fortune. How would you assess how welcoming Fortune is now to women compared to 60 years ago when Carol was signing on?
Well, I would love to hear Carol's perspective as well. I think it's a world of difference, I have to imagine. I have found the newsroom and the leadership team and our board to be extremely welcoming, very excited. I think I don't think Alan recruited me because I was a woman. I think it was a bonus that I happened to be the first woman to be doing this, and quite an honor. I really am honored to be in this position. But I think that it's really important to me that our leadership team is built out to include more diversity, to pull more women up. There's definitely still work to do on the masthead. It's evolved and it is evolving, and we're putting resources into the newsroom to grow and change it and make it more digital. And there creates a lot of leadership positions that we can create, and we have to take the diversity into effect. But I've been it's been a great experience. I mean, everybody has really, I think it's a nice maybe perk that I'm a woman, but I don't feel like that every day when I walk into the office or when I walk into the executive room. It feels very welcoming.
Yeah. Winnie, you're in the position to see what's in our pipeline in terms of journalists coming in, coming through the pipeline and heading our way. What interest do you think business journalism has to them? And especially, how do you assess the interest in business journalism among the women students that you're seeing?
Well, a couple points. One off, I am also thrilled that Allison was able to quote a female mentor, because I didn't have one, and I've tried to be one to a number going forward. But it is quite striking how, not that no one was ever supportive, but my mentors happened to be men, and that's the way it was. My student body here is mostly women these days.
Really?
So Columbia is mostly far more women than men in the journalism school. So you're going to get far more women out there in those jobs too, just like Allison, I'm sure already knows, and because she hires now and she knows exactly what that's like. I do think there's a particular interest in it. There's also a desire to maybe look at business journalism very differently than it was even 5 years ago. This generation is thinking about climate, environment. Are we holding businesses accountable? What's going on with greenwashing? How's the labor market working? In a ways that I'm not going to say those stories weren't covered, because I felt like I did a lot of that in my career and I cared about it, along with being a tax nerd, Susanne. But I really see that interest in humanity as it manifests itself in the workplace and in corporations as being of great interest. And so I think it will at least subtly change business journalism going forward.
Terrific. In the investigative world, Susanne, women are not thick on the ground in that field either. So being in a business investigative journalism, it's like how many concentric circles can you step into, and how many people are in them when you get to the middle? What do you see in the contacts that you have, the conferences you go to, the newsrooms that you move through? What are you seeing in terms of women's interest in the hardcore financial investigative journalism that is your franchise?
I think it is a challenge. I think you see the deeper you go, the more white and the more male that it is. Even when I was working on the tax project for, it was a lot of years there, but I was the only woman that was touching most of it until the very end. And you're aware of it. It's hard not to be, just when you've got a screen and everybody looking back at you for, when I wasn't in the office with COVID. And I think it's a challenge for newsrooms. It's hard because I think business reporting is attracting more women. I think initially, it was a mainly male dominated area, and I think you are seeing more women go into it. But I still think the investigative, especially with financial stuff, it's a challenge. And I think we're trying to work on it. It just takes time and finding the right people. It's not just, you could look and say, well, put a woman here, hire a woman there, but sometimes it just is a natural fit of an individual that, they happen to be male for the work that they've done or the project that you're going to put them in.
Right. Allison, in the world of technology, it's certainly a very thought of as a very male dominated world. What are you seeing in terms of the applicants interested in jobs there? And I'm Fortune has a great investigative track record itself. So I don't want to, leave you out of the question I posed to Susanne. That's a small concentric circle, women investigative reporters. And I'm curious about what you're seeing and what you're doing to bring more along.
Yeah, Yeah, I'm trying to think of our masthead and our recent hires. We've probably hired about 30 people since I came on 6 months ago into the newsroom, and many into leadership roles. I have about 12 direct reports. When I started, I had 2, so I've hired pretty much all of them. I think there's 2 or 3 that are men, and the rest are all women, and a lot of are women that I've recruited, or that we've recruited since. And so the dynamic is changing quite a bit. Men are terrific, and they are great supporters, and they're very smart, and we want them in the newsroom. Absolutely. And also, by the way, men have been incredible mentors to me. I would not be where I am without Henry Blodgett, Nick Carlson. Like, I definitely had men looking out for me to help pull me to where I am. But yeah, I'm seeing a lot of interest from women. Business is the most exciting thing you could possibly cover. I think a little bit, it could be daunting because you're not taught finance in school growing up, your history, science, all those things the finance should be in the curriculum from growing up, and it's not. And so if you're not exposed to it, I think it is a barrier and people get intimidated by it. But I'm encouraged to see a lot more women diversity, just realizing that that's not the case. You can learn anything. They're excited to learn it. If you learn finance, you can really learn anything. You can do anything if you speak that language. And, I think our leadership team is changing at Fortune. There's a lot of women in it now, and they're finding other women too.
That's terrific to hear. I have one of my favorite tricks at student journalism gatherings is to ask in the audience how many of them plan to cover business journalism. And typically, as Winnie knows, 3, 4, maybe 12 hands go up if you're really, really lucky. And my punchline is, you're wrong. Every one of you is going to cover business journalism. You're just not going to be as prepared for it as the people who put their hands up.
I think that's a really good point, because I think it covers so much of what we do.
Yeah, business
as reporters, and I also think it's how we talk about it. Like, I don't. I think, obviously it's great to know a lot about finance and everything else, but I remember, when I got hired at the Wall Street Journal, I was hired in to cover Wall Street, and I was going through my final interviews at the Wall Street Journal. And I interviewed, you go through and you interview with all the editors, and I went down for my final interview with Dan Hertzberg, who was then overseeing the Wall Street coverage. The money and investing section at the time reported into him. And we were down at 200 Liberty Street. This was I still feel like I'm one of the young people here on the panel, but it was 20 some years ago. And he called me into his office, and the office at the time overlooked. You could see Wall Street from his office. I was just like, in a day, I was just like the most amazing thing ever. I was coming in from Canada, and this was like the greatest thing ever. And he looks out the window and he points at the New York Stock Exchange. And they were hiring me to cover Wall Street. He looked at me and he said, "Money, power, and greed. What more could a reporter want?" And I thought, wow, that just summed it up. And I've always thought that whenever whenever those things diverge, or come into the frame, it's just the most incredible thing to cover it. And it's about human beings, and we cover it when those things go wrong. And you just look, at just all the incredible stories that we've had just in the last couple of years with. Just thinking of, I was watching We Crashed, like WeWorks, like all these great stories, or stories just about humans and human failure, and just and it happens that they work at a company, but I think it's just such a great thing to cover. I loved covering it when I did it for all the times that I covered Wall Street for 20 years.
I love that passion. I love it too, and always have. But the trick is that if you learn to cover it, you can cover anything better. Yeah. If you learn to cover business, you can cover sports better. You can cover culture better. You can cover
politics better. I ended up covering the president when with Trump, because I knew a lot about business, and he was a business guy in New York, so they called on me to start covering his businesses.
Yeah, and we never, of course, had a president that was operating a business out of the Oval Office before. So that was an occasion where a whole bunch of people had to suddenly become aware of how business works.
You cover state governments or governments. Yep. You need to know how money works and how it moves in general terms, and contacts on Wall Street. I think if you get that as the foundation, you can go anywhere. It really is. And
and it's not necessarily true that if you learn how to cover sports, you can cover anything. Not that there's anything wrong with covering sports, but it's not necessarily true that if you learn how to cover politics, you can cover anything. If you learn how to cover sports, but if you learn how to cover business, you really can cover everything, because there's an element of business. There's a a platform there's a business person in every one of those beats that you can then connect with.
And there's money everywhere.
There is money everywhere. Winnie, when you were editing, what was the hardest thing about connecting with readers, getting your writers to connect with readers? That's often the rap on business journalism, that it doesn't have it doesn't have the reader appeal. It doesn't have the juicy, sexy, if it bleeds, it leads kind of news. What was the challenge of getting writers to write in a way that would engage people with the world of business?
Well, I point to Susanne here. She certainly knew how. So it's not that hard, right? And you did too, Diana. As you Madoff was something that like everybody wanted to read about it. Nobody could get enough of how did that happen and how do we learn from it? In this day and age, it's gotten much simpler in a way.
Really?
Partly because of social media and partly because people can take bite-sized pieces, I think, of it. You don't have to be doing what we used to think of as the classic Fortune cover story, which was the huge thing on a company or an executive. Right. And people are interested in lots of the bits and pieces. If you just walk around right now, what does everybody want to talk about? They want to talk about the Great Resignation. Even if it's a fallacy, it's certainly talking points for right now, right? Sanctions on Russia. Everybody wants to talk about it. I think it's so much more accessible than it was, and even 5 years ago, but certainly more than 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think the writers have figured out too that really it is about humanity. Let's point for just a moment to Joe Kahn, who today was named to the top of the New York Times, and he started as a business reporter there. He was covering Wall Street. Before you, Susanne, he sat in that chair over there covering Wall Street. And I think his success includes the fact that he could cover politics and many other things as well as business. And that will leave him better suited. I find students today know that, and they're trying to figure out how to get there. But we should acknowledge here, and I'd love to hear from you guys on this, it's not been easy. I think women still have a lot of hurdles. And I've heard Allison say how great it is, but it's hard when you're the only woman in the room. Yeah. And I guarantee you many, many people are going to be the only woman in the room. Maybe when they go to an interview, when they interview a lot of executives who are all men, maybe it's in their own newsroom. I can't tell you when it happens, but it's a hard place to be.
It is. And one of the questions I wanted to
I'll just jump in and say it's definitely not all it's not all rosy for sure. Yeah. And I do think that the higher you climb, that the more I have seen, I think when you're at sort of the same level as your peers who are male, right, it can all seem very like, oh, what is this? What exists? No, it all seems great. And then you climb and you're like, at a certain point, it's not all the same and people don't want it to be the same. And there's people who help you up to a point, but if you get any higher, they don't want to help you. And then you're on your own. So it's definitely not all equal, not all roses.
Okay. I think I can connect with Carol now through Britt, who has her phone. Carol, if you can hear me, we'd love to hear what the world of business journalism looked like when you first started out and what tempted you to go into that world.
Well, Allison, I want to say this is a heck of a way to meet you.
Sorry about the reverb.
Okay.
Hello?
Yeah, they can hear you, Carol. It's just there's some reverb. Don't worry about it. Just keep speaking.
Just keep speaking, okay. Carol. Tell us what drew you into the world of Fortune magazine 60 years ago.
Well, right. If I could have stayed, I'd been up to 80 now, I think. Well, I came out of the University of Missouri journalism school and got a job at the Maytag Company, editing a house organ, but I really wanted to work at Time Incorporated, and I wanted to be at Time first, or Life, or Fortune. And so I had interviews at all three, and the only one that liked me was Fortune, which is the greatest thing that ever happened to me, because although I didn't know it at that time, it was wonderful. Shall I keep talking?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yes. So I got a job at Fortune, And I remember that the first day I went, there was absolutely no one there at 9 o'clock. But anyway, I loved it from the start, although I didn't know much about business. I remember being astounded when I learned that profit was more important than revenues. And so I did, but I was a pretty good learner. That was always a good thing. And one of the editors, Dan Seligman, was particularly interested in my career and helped me a lot and told me wonderful things like, don't use pompous words, use idiomatic words. And so I gradually, I started as a researcher, what we called them then. And then when I'd been there, I think about 4 years, the managing editor called me in and said, we're going to start an investment column, and we need 2 writers on it, and we'd like to make you a writer on it. And I said, well, women don't write. Very, very smart thing to say. And he said, well, we think we're going to change that. So that's how I got going, was writing for the investment column. And I had to learn everything about writing for Fortune and the investment column because I didn't really know much about investments. But it was just a great place to work, and people were very helpful. I always thought that one of Fortune's secrets was it had great editors. They were wonderful to work with. They made the writers look good. And so I did my best as others came along, including a very good friend of mine who became the first assistant managing editor, Wyndham Robertson. And whatever I could do to help women, I did. But I would say that it was 1970 when the first really drive to get women journalists moved ahead occurred, and that was very important. And from that time on, things really started to work much better for women. But nevertheless, there's been a lot of need for us to come up with more. Now, what else would you like me to talk about?
Well, you raise a good point that all of us here are standing on the shoulders of sister journalists who went before and were willing to go to court to open up jobs for us, to open up opportunities. Women like yourself who at other less enlightened publications got trapped in those researcher jobs where they were never able to rise and to get a byline and to get the coverage opportunities. There were some very brave women, some of them at the Times, some at Newsweek, some at the Daily News, who filed the lawsuits and took the hits to their careers, which that involved in order to get these doors open for us. So as we're talking about women trailblazers, that's a group of women trailblazers we need to take our hats off to, because that was hard. They sacrificed a lot of comfort, had a lot of scary nights. I knew Betsy Wade and came to know her very well in her later years, and she was one of the named plaintiffs in the lawsuit against the New York Times. So that wasn't easy. It's not easy now, to confront the institutional problems that the industry faces. And one of the things I wanted to ask is, since we have a bit of time now, is what do you know now that you wish you'd known when you were started out? If you could go back to the person you were, the woman you were when you started your job, looking back on where you are now, what would you tell that beginning reporter that would have made it easier to get along? I think I'll start out. The thing I would have told that beginning reporter is learn the documents. Because documents don't care if you're a boy or a girl. If you can master the business document, the political document, if you can master those, you're going to save yourself a lot of gender issues. I wish I'd learned that a lot earlier than I did. What about you, Susanne? What did what do you know now that you wish you'd known then, and it might help our sisters coming along have an easier time? Unmute yourself.
Yeah, I think the documents, it's a huge one. And I think getting and doing more, some of it wasn't relevant when we first got in, but doing more data journalism. And then I think the other thing that I didn't realize until I was older is your youth is an advantage. Like, I just think I always thought, well, I'm young, no one's going to hire me, but they want to hire young people. I just always sort of made it, I think, too hard for myself sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think I give that advice to people who are, at the times, when they're not sure, what they should do, or should they apply for this job or that job. And the advice isn't always apply for it. It might not make sense, but don't think, well, I'm too young to apply for that. Like, they want to move up young people and they want to do that. And foreign jobs, you don't think, but I didn't realize till after, but I was older, that they want to have young people go over, because often older people can't go because they've got families.
So put your hand up even if you're young.
Yeah.
And I wish I'd known that too. I wish I'd known that
Yeah.
too. What about you, Allison? What do you know now that you wished you'd known when you were just starting out?
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely would have leaned even harder into finance initially. I covered startups and venture capital quite a bit, but really, I wish I'd done a stint covering Wall Street specifically. I wish I had done more on covering documents sooner. I think we have a writer now who's really young and so dogged, and she's so much promise, and she knows how to read every filing. You are going to be an absolute superstar. You were 25 years old, you're to the moon. That is a deadly combination. There's the doggedness to chase things down and dig up dirt, plus the financial acumen. It's amazing. So I would have done that. I also think say yes to everything, even if you're kind of oh, why do I have to do this assignment? Your editor probably has a reason that they're giving it to you, and you might not see the value in it immediately, but maybe it's even just source building. There's all sorts of great stories that can help you do source building. And I would also say network like crazy as much as you can, meet as many people as you can in your 20s. You will grow. Your career will grow, their career will grow. You'll all be sources for a long time. Careers ebb and flow, and the more people you can meet early on, the more connections you'll have down the road, and they'll multiply. And then, sources who appreciate the time they spent with you will then introduce you to more sources, and it just goes on and on. So I'm definitely get out there. I feel like the first few years I was reporting, I was going more than my senior year of college. And I was oh, this is exhausting. But it was 100% what I needed to do.
It was worth it. It was worth
yes.
it. Winnie, what about you? You had a slightly different career path from reporting, but what do you know now that you wished you'd been able to tell yourself back then?
Well, two or three things. One is I just want to comment on the getting to know people that Allison's saying. This may seem incredibly strange because we're coming out of a pandemic, but breakfast is great. People will meet you for breakfast who are hard to get at other times in the day if you're willing to be out there early, and that includes Wall Street people and lots of other people. And the other great advantage of that is you don't get hit on so much at breakfast. And I got to tell you, if you're a woman, you have to endure a certain amount of harassment. And yes, a drink can loosen the lips. That's absolutely true. But breakfast was sort of a secret weapon. And if you're not going out to breakfast, having those phone calls really early in the morning is a great way to cultivate people, because you get sort of a different relationship when you're talking to somebody first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
They are a little looser, I think.
I never thought of that, but you're right.
That's useful. You may wind up with some thankless jobs. I know I've had a few over my career. I don't think they're a bad thing, but I think women like to make themselves indispensable. And I know I'm speaking, maybe that sounds like a stereotype, but it can happen to guys too. So whoever you are, don't be indispensable in your job. Always be training your replacement. Always. Because if you're really good at what you want to do, I know Susanne said they want to move you, and they do, but they also go, oh, she's doing that so well. I can't move her out of that because I don't have anybody else to do that. And that's often the case for women more than men. And I've heard this in discussions in many newsrooms over and over again. Oh, we'll take that guy and give him a shot at X. Oh, she's really good at that. I don't know who would do that. Yeah. And I think that becomes a handicap. So I would say whenever you get in the job, instead of saying, oh, I do this well, no, I could give some of it to somebody else, but it's going to be better if I do it and do it myself. No. Definitely be training other people for all parts of your job at all times. Don't do them yourself because you can do it easier than training somebody else. And someone who you think could always step into your job. And that can help you move on faster, bigger, and better.
What good advice. Now that's something I wish I had done when I was younger. That's terrific. Carol, if you can hear me now, the question is, what do you know now that you wished you'd known when you first started out about managing your career? What would you tell that younger Carol Loomis to help her get along better?
Well, I've honestly been thinking about that question, and I don't know that I have a good answer. I've enjoyed hearing some of these answers, but I think that you certainly need to realize that there are impediments in your way sometimes, and you just have to figure out ways to step beyond them. As I said, women didn't ride at fortune, but eventually they did. You just have to assume that there are going to be opportunities for you. If you just do good work, people are going to notice. That would be my feeling.
That's good advice as well. But I want to invite anyone in our audience tonight to use the chat function to send us questions that you might like to hear. You're not going to get an array
I
of.
can't hear that.
I'm sorry. I'm saying I would like to invite our audience to send their questions in. I've got the chat box open. I'll be watching for them. But in the meantime, I'd like to just throw one other question out. What can women do more? I'm kind of blown away by what Allison said. So this is a question I didn't clear with all of you in the past, but I think we're ready to talk about it. What more can we do to help each other get have a bigger presence and a more impactful presence in business journalism, through association, through events like this, through mentoring organizations you may know about or be part of? What more can we do to help the young women that Winnie is very gracefully educating for us to come out into this world? Winnie, what do you want us to do? What do you want the women in business journalism to do to help the young women that you're educating now?
Well, I will say, from sitting in a newsroom management job, which I was until a short time ago, the thing that's needed the most is, I guess, Allison's, which is women editors. There just aren't very many of them. So maybe she's got the secret, and maybe now there's a lot more, but it's something we need to really do. I think identifying women earlier in their careers and saying, you could do this, and here's some of the things you might want to do. I would love to see women take short opportunities, filling in as editors more around and getting comfortable with those skills and saying, oh yeah, I could like this. Obviously, I want to see them in investigative journalism and those kinds of places too. But that seems to me this real need, because women are the majority of most newsrooms now, as I understand it, but they're certainly not the majority in those higher positions. So it's about early on in your career. I think in the 20s and 30s is when you have so much bandwidth and where you can learn so much. And I want to make sure in those years, a lot more women are exposed to editing and managing so that they too can be the next generation.
We have a great question here that I think is going to be enormous fun. And it's for you, Carol. Carol, what advice would you give Allison, who is now editing Fortune magazine, 60 years after you first started there? What advice would you give her about that heritage, that legacy, and what she should be doing with it?
Well, I think she has come into that job at what is a difficult time for the magazine business, and I read the last issue very closely, and I thought she did a very good job. There were several articles in there that were very, very good. I think it's hard for people like me who never saw this to see content supplied by a company, which is really saying, the company company is contributing words to the magazine instead of advertisements, and that's hard for me to get used to. But nevertheless, I think that Fortune had really a great number of very, very good articles, and some by people I knew and some by people I didn't know. And I certainly think that Allison is headed down the right track. It's a tough world out there right now, but it certainly seems to me that she's got the right ideas about how to get to handle it.
Well, that's got to feel good, Allison.
It means the world. Thank you.
Terrific. Let me pop over to you, Susanne, with the question we raised before. What more can women be doing to help bring more women, particularly into your field, for example?
I think it is about, I don't think I have a new thought here in terms of just the idea of it's about supporting women and about sort of just recognizing, not just sort of where someone is, but where they can be and what skills they have that maybe, they're doing something now. And I think we do sort of put people in a box and say, well, that's what they're doing. But, what more, you sort of have to look at people's careers really holistically. I think the Times is trying to do more of that. And I think as they continue to do it, I think we're going to see more advancement. They've got mentorship programs now that I think have come even so far since the 10 years that I've been there.
Right.
And it's important I participate in them because I think it's important that we do that. But one of the other things I was thinking, and I just want to pivot to one of your questions about just, and I don't think it applies just to women in business, but I think one of the things that's really important that we all do is we have conversations about compensation in the newsroom, because I don't think there's any doubt. I've seen the studies that women are underpaid in newsrooms compared to men. And part of it is simply, I'm not saying this is the whole thing, but men are more likely to ask for a raise, and people who ask for a raise are more likely to get it. And I always encourage women, when they're, a lot of them are younger, they get hired in and they get stuck at a salary like everybody else. You get hired in and you don't get a raise for a lot of years, just to go in and ask. Ellen Pollock, the head of the business section at the New York Times, just encourages everybody to ask. And she put it on the table so that it wasn't something that we, people in her section, I'm not in the section, but that they weren't worried about it. And she had a whole talk with everybody in the group saying, come in and ask her a raise. You may not get it, but she wanted to take the stigma away from that. And I think it's really important.
I think that's excellent advice.
That we do that.
I was very shy about it in my young years. I was just so grateful to have a job, working all, I just couldn't believe anybody would pay me to do this that I loved so much. But my husband, we were both starting out, newly married, and he said, you got to ask for a raise. I was making, a pittance. And so he kind of coached me and prodded me to be a little bit more forthcoming, but I wish I had been more forthcoming.
You shouldn't have to threaten to quit though, and to get and that's how I always felt, was unless you had another job offer, you weren't going to get a raise. And I think that's wrong. And I think that culture is changing, but I think be your own best advocate. And it doesn't mean you may not get it when you go in and have reasons why you think you should get it when you go in, but go in.
It's if you think you're worth it. I mean, it's not, you're not saying, if you don't pay me this, I'm going to leave. You're going to say, no, this is what I'm worth now because I've learned so much more and I'm contributing so much more, which I think is helpful. I'm looking at questions we have here. Two great ones. And one of them I'm going to put to you, Allison, because of the world you come out of. Source relationships, this question is, can often be tricky for women to navigate. We've gotten some great advice from Winnie about do breakfasts, but yes, they can become awkward. They can become unpleasant. What advice do you have for aspiring financial reporters who have to navigate the awkward interactions with male sources?
Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating that we have to deal with it, and you will. Unfortunately, you will. There's no way around it. You will. You have to. you don't have, there's nothing that you have to cover, and it's not a good answer because you should be able to cover any story. But if there's ever like a source relationship that is making you really uncomfortable, you can also always go to your editor and tell them, and you'll never have to deal with that person again. That happened to me one time. Someone had like sent me a gift. It was really awkward and I was really uncomfortable, and I talked to my boss about it. He's like, never talk to that person again. Just, you don't need them. They're not a source, like not like, doesn't matter, just never. And it was great. And like, you know, I never had to deal with that person ever again to this day. So definitely have a straight conversation with your editor when you're in uncomfortable situations. You know, unfortunately, it is watching yourself when you're in those events, and you're like making sure that you're in crowds and in smart places. And it's a bullshit thing that we all have to deal with. And unfortunately, it's hard to avoid. But I think the best thing I could say is don't put yourself in uncomfortable situations. There are other times of day you can talk to people, as Winnie said. You talk to your editor about it, get yourself out of the situation. But you do always have to have your radar up. I mean, you always have to know why are people talking to you? Why are sources always talking to us? What's in it for them? And you don't, you know, you want to make sure it's about the story.
Yeah, and that's very, very good advice. One wonderful question here I wanted to get to before we have to wrap up, and that is this is from Carol Sargent. Do you think, and Winnie, you're as an editor, a long career, long editor, you're in a good position to see this, but you too, Allison, do you think that women as financial journalists may frame finance and business stories differently than men do? I don't know that if I do or not. I mean, I've been a writer all my life, never have done that editing. I don't know that I frame it differently than a man might do so. But certainly I think each individual brings a different gift to it. But is there a woman's take on how you frame business stories? What do you think, Winnie?
Well, I mean, the simple answer is women are as different as from each other as you can imagine. So there isn't obviously a women's take any more than there is a men's take. I do see a drift in different directions, and not just toward maybe what are predictable, which sometimes I get that, like, oh, well, women, they're more interested in the consumer stories or something like that. I don't think that's really true. I don't see that. But I do think that women in this particular age are really consumed by many of the things that journalism is very consumed by, and unyielding on that in an excellent way. They want to know if companies are truly diverse. They want to know what it's like for women in those companies and what obstacles they're hitting. So whether they're covering venture capital or Wall Street, consumer products, or Johnson & Johnson, whatever companies they're covering, I think they're asking those questions all the time of the people they're talking to. So I think that's bubbling up more. I do see that. Yeah. But the subject areas are really clear to me. They're really, really interested in our companies not just making pledges about the environment. What are they actually doing? Are they not just making pledges about more diversity? What's it like to actually work there? And when you hit a wall and something goes bad, are you just thrown into human resources or arbitration, or does something fundamentally feel different? And I think there is not necessarily crossing all the way over into advocacy, which is something else that our profession is wrestling with, as well as, journalists who, educators who are trying to teach it. But there's a little bit more of a willingness to go there. And I think you're seeing a little bit more of a willingness from that than you are from my male students. And they're really pushing the envelope. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's terrific. Allison, what do you think? Is there a way women frame stories? You've got a dominant woman staff now, and that's not, I'm sure, been the case everywhere you've worked. So what's your feeling about whether women frame a business or finance story differently?
I don't think that we do. Maybe it's a blind spot I have, but I don't think so. I think it's pretty, people are universally interested in pretty similar things when it comes to finance and business just in general. The real estate market, fascinating to everybody, especially right now. I think, no, I mean, I do think that maybe you could say make it more approachable as an instinct. to more people, but I don't know. I think that would be a generalization. I'm not sure that I would have evidence to back that up.
Yeah, the one thing that does come to my mind in a way that might shape stories slightly differently, I always made an active effort, conscious effort to widen the number of women who were among my sources in my source base. And, covering finance, that wasn't easy. There were not a lot of women in my source base. And I'm sure Carol had the same issue in the years that she was starting out. It was hard to find the woman economist, the woman banker, the woman corporate executive. But the more of them I had in my Rolodex, and the more of them that I could quote in my stories and have as the experts in my stories, I think that shaped the stories in a different way. Not because I was a woman, but because I was making a point of diversity among my sources. Floyd Norris, my dear friend, used to say that, reporters only know what their sources know. Now, that's not entirely true, but it is true that if you don't have a diverse catalog of sources that you're drawing on, you are going to see the world from a particular vantage point, and the broader that is. So I think by bringing women into your Rolodex, there's an old term, bringing them into your source list, you can shape the stories in a way that either a man or a woman who's not trying to do that would not do. Let's see what other questions. What are resources that you suggest female graduate journalism students look into? I'm assuming that this means if you're interested in business journalism, I can speak for Peter here. This is one of them, the Financial Writers Association. There are other great organizations. SABU is one, and the Journalism and Women's Symposium is another. There are some great parajournalism groups, as they're called, journalism organizations that are out there that provide great networking opportunities for women. I'm also noticing something happening on my speaker circuit. I do a lot of public speaking. We're hoping it's going to come back after the pandemic, but did a lot. And I'm noticing that a lot of big groups in the fields I talk to, Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, for example, the Turnaround Management Association, people like that, they're starting to start channels for their women, programming that is aimed at addressing women and giving them networking opportunities within their organization. I've been invited to talk to a number of them, and it's exciting to see how excited women are. Well, those are women that we need to know. We need to know the women that are coming up in the professions that are made up of people that we cover. So I think that's another thing to watch for, is opportunities to speak and to attend some of the women's channels that are developing in the professional and institutional organizations that you may interact with. ABA, for the bar associations and medical associations are doing the same thing. So that may be a help. Did you want to add something to that, Carol? I don't want to.
She didn't hear the whole question.
Okay, sure. Sorry, I'm sorry. The question was, what organizations or what resources can young women take advantage of to help forward their careers in journalism now? Were there organizations you relied on coming along that were helpful, or looking back now, what would you advise women to do in order to network more and get to know each other better?
Well, I certainly think the world has changed quite a bit. Women were not allowed to go to the New York Economic Club dinners when I was there, and I actually sued them, but I didn't win the suit because it was a private club and they had the right to do what they wanted to do. I just think that women have to take advantage of every opportunity that there is out there for them to circulate and be considered just as eligible for any job that exists. whether it is now held by a man or a woman. And people ask me whether I found that when I went on interviews to interview businessmen, whether I thought there was any difference between how they treated women and men, and I said I did not think so, because I believe that if you knew your subject, you immediately telegraphed to the person you were interviewing that you had studied up for this interview and knew what you were going to be asking, and they completely forgot whether you were a man or a woman. So, and I think that exists today. I think that's about what I would have to say about it.
Okay, I think there's certainly a good lesson there that expertise can be a very disarming shield for some of the awkward situations that women do find themselves in dealing with sources. I'm looking at the clock, and Peter, I'm ready to hand it back to you. It's been a lovely, lovely evening, and it's delightful to meet all of you. Some of you I know already, but delightful to see you all here. And thank you for your patience with our evening and for your wisdom and insights. Claudia would have loved this. She absolutely would have loved it. I can't think of a nicer, better way to honor what she brought to our profession, what she brought to the newsrooms that she worked in. And so I'm really delighted that all of you made the time to do this. Over to you, Peter.
Yes, I'll echo that. Diana was thinking exactly the same thing. Claudia would have loved this. I want to thank you very much for being a knowledgeable and empathetic moderator. Thank Winnie, Allison, Carol, and Susanne for being great panelists. Also, Olivia, who helped recruit a lot of you, and Britt, who solved our technical problems. One last thing, we have more events coming up. If you are a member of the New York Financial Writers Association, thank you. If you're not, go to nyfwa.org and pay your dues. We'd love to have you on board. It's a great organization, and we're trying to do more and more of this professional development work because we sort of see that as the future of the organization. So once again, thank you very much for a wonderful evening to all of you.
Thank you.
Take care then.